Hi everyone. So here we are for the fourth or fifth, I don't even remember, video of the series about Budo in life, Budo at work, and Budo in education, in the case of Guillaume as Guillaume is a teacher. Thank you very much for coming today, Guillaume, for this series.
Thank you.
We've had you for a long interview a few years ago, so we are not going to go through all your presentation. You will have a link to the first video, the first interview we shot together. And so still a short introduction and what you are doing now, especially so you, as a teacher in school and your new dojo, of course. And then we'll move directly to the main topic of, well, I guess you want to start with education, so let's do that.
Okay. So, my name is Guillaume Érard. I've been living in Japan for about 10 years, practicing Daito Ryu Aiki Jujutsu and Aikido side by side. And side by side is of importance to me. Professionally, I'm a researcher, genetics, but in Japan I mostly did teaching. So I teach biology in an international school. I've done a bit of consulting for medical research, but now I'm mostly teaching biology, which allows me sufficient time for practice and also taking care of my family, which it's the most important thing for me. We can get back into that, I suppose, but for me, if you get to establish an order, family comes first, and then there's Budo, and then there's a number of other things. What's different compared to last time is I opened the dojo in Yokohama. We started that, when was it? September. So it's brand new. Now with the coronavirus situation, of course, it takes a little of time to start. But it's working. So we're hoping to build that on the long run. Now, of course, we mostly focus right now on solo exercise, weapons, and things like that to limit physical contact. But the good thing about Aikido and Daito Ryu to some extent is that it's a complete enough art that it can lend itself to different types of practice according to the situation. And as I'm sure others will have told you that, if you're a Budokai, you don't stop being a Budokai just because you can't step on the mat. Or because you can't actually touch another partner or get too close to another partner. It's a full set, and you can very much continue working on things, even in those sort of situations.
Okay, and so you've been a teacher for 7 years, I think, something like that, 6-7 years.
A teacher
at school, biology teacher.
Oh yeah.
So it gives you quite a lot of time to think about what education is.
Of course, yeah.
I know that you were not at the beginning very confident about teaching to especially young people. And I know you worked a lot on your methodology and your approach of teaching. What your Aikido and Daito Ryu practice brought to you in terms of the ability to teach, to communicate with people, and is there something specific in your approach that comes from a Budo practice?
In terms of direct application, no. In other words, in terms of, if you think about teaching methodology or I don't even using analogies or whatever you want to carry that and to transfer it to what I do professionally, no. But I would say that what Aikido's done on me has made it so that I was able to become a teacher. As you said, I was never a teacher, to be honest with you. I opened a dojo a few years ago, or many years ago, when I was in Dublin, out of necessity. because my funding for my PhD ran out, and I was, considering ways to, to put food on the table and to pay the rent. And at the time, the economy, it was before the economic crisis, and so the economy in Ireland was very strong. So it was very easy. I opened a dojo in the city center of Dublin. Many people came, and that actually helped me to finish my thesis. So that was a necessity, never like something that I wanted to do. And then when I moved to Japan, didn't consider teaching either. I mean, it just happened to be either that or, waiting tables in Ginza. So it was an easy decision. I always thought that it would be something that I would do just a few months until I found something in research, in biological research. But then I found out that one, the timetable as a teacher allows you to do more martial arts than as a researcher. And also the other thing is that I just happened to realize that when I woke up in the morning, the teaching job was the only job in which I didn't mind going. I mean, not only I didn't mind going, but I was happy to go. And that had never happened to me until then, even research, even as much as I liked research and the intellectual challenge and so on. I didn't have that feeling. I did it because it had to be done. There I was getting up and I was like looking forward to the day. So, after that I got married and I got a child, and it sounded like it was a good way to get a balance. And that word of balance, I guess, is going to be very important throughout our discussion. And then moving forward, since we speak about opening a dojo, that's not something I wanted to do. I mean, yourself, I've been here a while and I never considered it. I was very happy to go to Hombu. But because of coronavirus, I couldn't go to Hombu anymore. My wife's a nurse, so I don't want to expose her by going to Tokyo by the train and so on. So I had to think about what to do. And then I had a discussion with Vilko Vrisman, the General Secretary of the IAF, just after we did an interview together and over lunch. He said, but aren't you thinking about opening your own place? And I was like, no, it's really not on my radar. And he said, you should really do it because it's going to ground you as a practitioner and so on. And his word kept going around in my head, and until the moment where I thought, okay, you know what, I'm not going to go back anytime soon to Tokyo. I might as well, it might be difficult to join a dojo in Yokohama because first Kanagawa-ken is quite large, so it would take some time and some transport, just the same. So why not going to Hombu? So then I started dojo, and it made sense. As soon as I started, what Vilko told me was exactly that: the sense of identity and the responsibility that I may have escaped for some time. The responsibility of having students. Going to France or going here, there, around the world and teaching seminars, that's easy. You're doing the job. Actually, you're benefiting from the groundwork that not legitimate, but the real teachers do. They teach the student from beginning to the end, and you arrive on a seminar, and everybody's here to see you. They've paid money to see you, and you take everything for granted. The UK meets on, and bim bam boom, you show your stuff, you throw people around, and then you take your plane back home. That's not teaching. So that came at the right time. Now, in terms of how one affected the other, it's not really for the teaching itself, but Aikido is not about changing other people. It's about changing yourself. And if you walk into a classroom and you want to change the kids, of course there's going to be some reactance. And a good friend of mine told me once, let me try to get this straight, the students won't care about what you know until they know that you care. And that was very important to me. And through that Budo thing, and Aikido especially, which is flexible, and that's what's confusing to many people. You put the cursor in different places. You're a little bit less dogmatic in the way you approach things, and it's a means to an end, and you're willing to have that inner flexibility in yourself to do what needs to be done. In other words, I try to work on myself every time that I hit a roadblock when I'm teaching science, while at the same time refusing to resort to manipulative behaviors. What my colleagues might talk like talk about saying that it's a teaching strategy. What they call teaching strategy, I call manipulation. In other words, the gamification of teaching, for example. They've got this appli that is called Kahoot, and they make quiz, and the kids, they answer on their mobile phone, and there is a ranking, and there is points that you can get, and there's many apps like this. But those apps trigger exactly the same mental mechanisms than the games on the phone or the pachinko, or those are micro reward sort of mechanism, plus the peer pressure of the ranking and so on. I don't like to use that. I don't like that it's used for games, for money games, for getting the attention of people, the number of people on their phone in the train. I'm not a gamer. Yes, you are. You know how much time you spend on your phone on those apps. So I refuse to use those in the classroom, which means I can't gamify the teaching. I can't make it look pretty and funny and so on, but I can change myself and in the way that I carry this across.
On the gamification, is your main problem the fact there is ranking in competition, which could be put aside to just focus on the fun aspect of the game? But I think games have been used for education for a very long time. So what's new is probably this.
I don't have anything. So let me get that straight. I have nothing against competition. I have competed for years and years as a judoka when I used to do water polo. I think competition teaches you a lot. I decided that I had enough with competition and I started Aikido. But you can only make that decision once you've known competition enough. So I have no problem with kids going through competition. But competition has its place. And I don't think the ranking of students within the teaching of core disciplines, academic disciplines, really is necessary. I mean, they've got the sports, they've got a number of different activities where they can express themselves within a competitive environment, but more importantly, an environment that they have chosen. In other words, an environment in which, admittedly, they must be kind of good at it, right? They play soccer, they must be kind of good at soccer, then they're willing to approach the competition. If you stick them in a classroom with a curriculum which is national, you've got those who can and those who've got more difficulty. Well, if you make them compete, then you're setting some of them for disappointment and failure.
Yeah. But, it's quite interesting because you are teaching in international school, and you're French, and the French system is very competitive, but not the American system. So, I mean, not in the way it gives points. But France is incredibly competitive in the way it gives points to students and ranks students. How many times? So is that something you reflected on? And do you think there is a different approach between the two ways of teaching?
First, I'd like to go back to your point about manipulation, to close that. So competition is not necessarily manipulative. When I'm talking about manipulation, I am talking about some neural mechanism that we know full well, and we know how playing around with odds, playing around with rewards, micro rewards, and to some extent ranking. But our competition will be one small element of an overall process. And I try not to use this, again, because it's manipulative. And I'm of the opinion that if you respect the people you're dealing with, you try not to be manipulative. I'm not saying that when you're teaching, especially when you've got your own kids, you've got to be somewhat manipulative. It can border from emotional blackmail to reward of pocket money or whatever. But I try as much as I possible not to. And again, the competition is a small aspect. So that's what I mean is the hijacking the sort of mechanisms in the brain that they already use constantly in commercials, in environments like this. I don't think teachers, I mean, it's a philosophical posture if you like, but I don't think as teacher we ought to be using that.
Well, I think we, as much as possible, it's not only about teachers, we should all try to avoid as much as possible manipulative techniques, especially raising kids in private life. But I sell things and I'm trying not to use those techniques. So the point is how you give the liberty of choice to people without manipulating them, and that's really not an easy thing to do.
No.
Because you see them going in the wrong path, and you have to have them make willingly the choice to go on the right path without manipulating them. That's really not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the ranking, your question about ranking, now, I mean, we both left French school some years ago, but it's true that years ago, I mean, the grades were put on the wall, and there was the ranking, there was your name, the grade, and your place.
Yeah, I mean, the teachers with
the Gaussian curve, and you knew you were on the left, on the right. Okay, now that doesn't happen anymore. I don't know whether it happens in France. I doubt it, but of course it doesn't happen in an international environment. Because again, I mean, what is giving back copies with grades in order of grades? What is it bringing to the table in terms of pedagogic approach? So of course not. Now, but in spite of that, I think it's probably, especially children between themselves, are just as competitive as we were. I don't think it really has to do with this. At the end of the day, applying to universities, applying for jobs, this is a competitive environment. So again, competition has its place. But again, the main thing for me is is it manipulative or is it not manipulative? I don't necessarily think that a successful sporting event doesn't really necessarily have to be competitive, but if there has to be competition, so be it. I mean, if only to deal with the disappointment of sometimes losing, sometimes winning, which, I mean, we can talk about it, but, Aikido can never lose. Yeah. And that's perhaps one of the things that is a bit problematic in our discipline. I'm not arguing to put some competition in Aikido, but why is it that Aikidoka should be infallible, especially when they're teachers?
Yeah, well, that's something we talked in a previous interview with Mark. It was the fact that that it's not that practitioners, Aikidoists are not losing, it's that they don't really accept that they are. So they don't have a way to...
And they also, that's right, they cheat. I think we can put the word. They put themselves in a situation where they cannot lose. I mean, I can name a few very famous teachers who do that. I'm not, but it's quite common. I mean, I had just like very recently a conversation with Elise Samdio about Takeda Sokaku. I mean, wondering, did he really, was he really as invincible as people say? And probably not. And especially when you've got, his sort of personality, he's bound to have had his butt kicked a good few times, most likely. And so did Ueshiba Morihei. But for some reason, people put them on a pedestal, and you can't say that. And I think that's toxic. I don't advocate putting competition in Aikido or putting, I'm not even advocating necessarily sparring. It's something that I do, but it's not something that I would recommend all my students to do. But at the same time, you always have to observe the claims. What does any given teacher, what sort of claim does he or she makes? And then do they deliver on those claims? But then at the end, the flip side is that I don't have to be accountable for somebody else's claim. If I'm not making the claim, don't ask me the question.
Sure. It also means that you have to have a broader vision of the Aikido world, so you have to know different teachers and try different teachers.
If Aikido is about changing yourself, well, you're going to have to be ready to accept that there are Aikido that are not the way that you like it. So don't go out of your way to undermine or criticize them. Just don't practice them. Maybe try, but don't. If you decide it's not for you, don't practice them. But I see stuff on the web or people practicing Aikido is absolutely not what I like or what I want, but I'm not calling that Aikido. At the very least, I think, for an art which is supposedly something which is harmonious and so on, I think that's probably the basic postulate that you have to admit that there are very different types of Aikido.
Well, that's a question I had a few days ago, and the question was, I thought it was a very good question for you, actually. What about teachers we would recommend to not go see elsewhere? Because they have arguments. They have their way, which is you have to master your own way before you can see other practice. But at the same time, it creates limitations in the way you can see your own teacher.
Do you mean all the teachers in Aikido or the martial arts disciplines?
Even within Aikido, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you spend a good 10 years practicing seriously in one school, I think it's about the right time to start looking around. By that time, you're Shodan, Nidan. Then it's a good idea. But you have to give it a serious go before you start looking around. Now, of course, at the very beginning, looking all around and deciding where you register because your amount of money and time is finite, fine. But once you're engaged in a way, you have to see it through for a while. Yeah.
And from another perspective, you were talking about manipulation. Some teachers are trying to keep their students close so they don't see their own weaknesses.
Yeah, I mean, there is a, and it's kind of a mutual sort of manipulation, or how would you say? What's the term?
Oh, you mean there is a...
They're fooling each other.
Yeah.
The way that some teachers train students to behave a certain way, and in return the students behave in the way the teacher wants, and then at the end of the day nobody knows why they're doing something. And in fact, they're not actually even meaning necessarily to do this. It just happens like this by positive reinforcement. And then you end up, when you're from outside, it's very easy to see. The question is, are you able to spot those things happening in your own school? Because I can guarantee they will be happening in your own school. So from within, can you actually spot them? That's difficult.
Well, we've seen many people who have been, I don't want to say victim, because I don't think there is a will from the teachers to undermine people, but we've seen people who actually suffered from such environments. I mean, I can recall one very famous YouTuber who makes way more views than we do, and who is quite a lot speeding against Aikido, if you see what I'm talking about.
An Aikidoka? He stopped Aikido, Rokas.
Yeah, he stopped Aikido to why he did a bit of MMA, whatever. But the point is not to criticize what he did, just to say that it looks like to me that he's been fooled, and to which extent do you think that's the person's fault or the teacher's fault? How a student can avoid being fooled like that? I mean, this teaching relationship is really difficult to understand for a beginner, for example.
I mean, okay, it's gonna sound strange, but I do not watch Aikido anymore on social media and on YouTube, so I don't know what he does now. I have no idea. All I know is the videos from way back that he did when he was doing tutorial in Aikido. The only thing I can say, with I guess some authority, is that he's very mediocre technically. So okay, but at the end of the day, I don't know where he was living and whether there was a lot of Aikido where he was, and so I mean, you have to accept that some people don't necessarily have access to good teachers. I mean, it's easy for us when you come from France, or when you live in Japan. You cross the street and there is a 7th dan or an 8th dan. Now, depending where he was from, that might have been difficult. So you can't really necessarily criticize him for that. And actually, I don't even necessarily would criticize him for being a teacher, because as far as I knew, he built his own dojo. He probably invested some money and so on. So there was kind of a real investment in there, like not only monetary but personally. I'm pretty sure. But again, I don't know him, so I'm just saying. And then the thing that struck me is that the way he thought Aikido was not the way I thought it was supposed to occur. Like I don't know, I remember something where he said that Batman is doing Aikido or whatever that is. So it shows you the level of of culture. Okay, if you relate to Batman to
just to clarify, I take him as an example of all the people disappointed by Aikido.
Yeah. But I'm getting there. But I think you have to set the scene first. Yeah. The issue is that he was expecting something from Aikido that he didn't find. He did it vocally, expressed his disappointment vocally, but I think maybe it's a generational thing. And again, who am I to judge anybody for expressing opinion vocally? That's what I'm doing now. No, the issue is, who presented Aikido to him in such a way? Because, the thing is, one thing that he did and that a lot of people won't do, he went out and tested himself. It didn't go well for him. Now, for what reason, I have no idea. Again, it was not very good to begin with, so that could be one reason. But then he may have tested himself in an environment which was completely non-suitable for that. And I think it came out to a genuine disappointment. And which is why it's an interesting case study, because I think it's reflective to what a lot of people feel. And, in a way, I really respect him because he tested himself. And when he came to a point where the reality did no longer fit his idea of Aikido, of more precisely how Aikido was taught to him, he turned and he changed. How many people do that? So I see in there a complete and utter honesty. He didn't waste his time lying to himself for the next 10 years or finding excuses. He changed. And I don't know what he does now, because I told you, again, I don't watch stuff anymore, but whatever he does, I hope that it suits him well. But he's clearly not... People say that he's done harm to Aikido, blah, blah, blah. Aikido's done himself some harm. And in fact, maybe on the long run, it's a good thing if more people react at that. And one thing that I wish is that they would call out their teachers. Those who have trained them in this way or fed them whatever nonsense, because those people are responsible. So again, I have nothing against him. I hope that it can stand as an example that we can no longer feed BS to people. His teachers have to be held responsible. And I don't know who they are, I have no idea. But I believe they would have some explaining to do, because, he was maybe Nidan or Sandan? Yeah, somebody gave him. Somebody, he took an examination. Somebody must have been responsible for this. And the responsibility is both ways in a grade. You receive a grade, it's a responsibility towards your teacher. The teacher gives you a grade. We've had that discussion on the last interview, right? Yeah. I'm waiting for those guys, whoever they are, or women, I have no idea who they were, but to take responsibility for what happened here. At the very least, to come forward and say,
Well, on a broader level, there are really many people who, you kind of left social medias and then recently have been doing the same, but have experience of the social media forums from a few years ago. When you see what people say about Aikido, what they think they are, it's obvious that there is a teaching crisis in Aikido. People are really teaching complete BS.
Yeah, you've got, a lot of the arguments start from a logical fallacy of either people who are not into Aikido expecting Aikido to be something that it's not, or some people pretending that it's something that it's really not. Again, and I'm going to say it again and again, but Aikido is a really poor self-defense system. It's a set of antiquated techniques that used to be very efficient within a certain time, within a certain context. But you remove that context and that time, the techniques, they go out of date. The army updates their techniques constantly. If you look at in the French army, they are changing system constantly. The self-defense system from 5-10 years ago was not what they're teaching now. They adapt, they change. How come something which is as old as Aikido, depending where you want to set the time, 50 years old, 100 years old, 150 years old, why would you expect it to be any good nowadays? It's like medicine. If you want an efficient medicine, you take nowadays medicine. And if you want to use traditional medicine, that's nice. It has to be studied. It has cultural value. It has some value. But frankly, if you've got cancer, I would suggest that you go and check yourself in a legitimate hospital. Same thing for combat and defense.
Well, there's an image that I like. The Japanese army now is pretty much the only group practicing Jukendo, the art of the bayonet. And they're not using bayonets on the field. But they're practicing it.
Yeah.
They have fun, they enjoy it, they enjoy the competition, they enjoy the historical aspect of the practice. But if you ask any Japanese military, they won't say that it's like battlefield technique. And saying, I think it's the same idea from the Aikido perspective. We're learning quite old techniques, and thinking that they are relevant to their time would mean that you would need to be updated, as you said. Some people do. Actually,
no, some people do. That's fine. Yeah, because of course, I mean, there is a core of a biomechanical concept that are very good, very efficient. So why? Which is why you actually see them cross martial arts. I mean, you can see things that look like kotegaeshi in Krav Maga, in many different things. I mean, how many ways can you actually twist a wrist? So really, the argument is this made for self-defense or is it made for the ring? No, of course not. I mean, are you crazy? It's like if you were asking if, is Kudo any good for defending yourself?
Or even for the battlefield.
Yeah, it's a stupid question. So no, it's an antiquated martial art. And just like anything which is antiquated, though it has lost its primary application, it doesn't mean that it can have one or several secondary applications. And especially when you talk about Budo, which basically is what Alex said, just do it, okay? Jujutsu became Judo, Kenjutsu became Judo. And it's written on the kan. That's what they did. They've taken martial arts techniques, turned them into educational system. How much more clear do you have to be? It's written in every book from all those disciplines that are registered at the Daidihon Butokai. Why are we having that argument?
But we're having the argument because many teachers are still teaching it in a fallacious way, which leads to disappointment. I think it's a core teaching issue in Aikido.
And then again, wait a second. Who says that, it depends on the context as well. Aikido is not suited for sparring in a cage. Of course not. But then who says that, when in the street it would be the same thing? It is not the same thing. But the very least is that if you're training in a way and you've got a main objective, you have to train consistently with that objective. In other words, if you train Aikido and you say that I want to do self-defense, then you have at the very least to spar, and you've got to learn to punch and to kick, and you've got to put the gloves and to stick a mouthpiece in your mouth. If you've never been punched in the face, how are you going to learn techniques to deal with being punched in the face? And you can do this, that's my point. But the curriculum of Aikido, if you want to call that Aikido, and the fact that we're wearing those ridiculous pants and the keikogi, and we've got all those gestures associated with it, there is much more to this. So as a primary defense system, Aikido is not suited, it's not the right thing to do. But if you take that out of the table as a main motivation, the question is, what is it that it brings to the table nowadays?
I was about to ask the question, because no, we've said that. So Aikido is a Budo, so it's an educational system. Mm-hmm. What does it teach?
Exactly, what does it teach? And the question is, what does it teach and how efficiently does it do it? And does it teach anything that you wouldn't get from other places, other arts, or the martial arts, or the discipline, whatever it is? Those are the real questions. What is it as a teacher that you are teaching your students? I can only speak for myself. For me, the main thing is I'm teaching what I call a cultural treasure. It's a set of techniques of knowledge that were passed on to us from generations of passionate people. And this, for me, I feel very strongly about this because this has to be respected and this has to be passed on. So the cultural aspect of it is very important. The terminology, the curriculum, the history, as much as you can actually see clear in the history, which in the case of Aikido and Daito Ryu is not so easy compared to other Koryu, which document much better their history. But still, I see it as a line, and you're at the end of a line, and the question that you ask yourself is, are you going to be part of that line? Are you going to pass on that knowledge to the next generation as an altered and as complete as you can, so that this cultural heritage continues? Because it's interesting for the sake of it. Why do you study art? Why do you study this and that? Because you like it. That's the main thing. If you don't like it to begin with, then stop wasting your time. I'm stepping on the mat because I like it, and I'm teaching it because I like it, and I think it's important as some knowledge that belongs to the general pool of knowledge of humankind, and that's my tiny little bit of area of competence, and I'm gonna pass it on. So the history, and then the practice itself, the manipulation of the joints, the contacts, and so on. I found that very important, but very interesting and pleasant. But I can completely accept that some people don't think so. Now that's for the main aspect. And then within that, what is it that you bring? Well, the thing that we spoke about, that the deep philosophical aspect to Aikido, and especially in the sense that the way Ueshiba Morihei formulated it, that you work on yourself. It's a framework that allows you to ask yourself some questions and to change yourself. I believe that Aikido is not meant to change people. It's meant to change the world by individual people changing themselves. And then if you have a critical mass of people who do that, who work on themselves, then the world may be a little bit better. You also have to think about the circumstances. That we are living an interesting time, in fact. We've taken for granted peace and stability and some degrees of economic comfort in our part of the world, which is of course a very biased view. And why are people leaving Aikido? Well, because frankly the message of peace and love of Aikido, who needs it? We are in peace and love. Now, yesterday, the British started to put some warships on standby, just in case Brexit went wrong without an agreement. Now think about it. A European country who deploys warships to protect itself from citizens of another neighboring European country. Now, if you had said that, like when you and I were at school, when we were all learning about Europe, we were thinking, are you crazy? Taking for granted that stability. Now that stability is put in question everywhere. But it hits us in the face as Europeans because we tend not to look at too much of what's happening in Afghanistan and in places like this. But when it happens in our place, we say, "Oh, wake up call!" Now,
only the COVID situation is also about that. Right now, it's status quo because nothing's happening. Mm-hmm. But once the virus is somewhat gone, the economy is going to collapse in many areas.
And the displacements of population and the access to water and so on, the climate change. Now we're going to get to a situation where it's going to be more unstable. Now, interestingly, perhaps that's going to be a time when people might look into again what O-sensei was saying and think that, oh, maybe that has some merit. But it may take a little bit of unrest for a while for people to see some merit. That's my opinion. So, why not keeping the flame up? And maybe it will be useful one day, and maybe it won't. But as long as we do what we like, if we like doing it, it doesn't cost us anything. But I think it probably could become once again a very topical sort of message.
If the point is to keep Aikido or Budo in general, Aikido in specific, relevant to its time, why not change it a little?
Well, who are you to change Aikido? Okay, so that's the way I look at it. Now the thing is, Aikido will change itself whether you want it or not.
It already changed.
There is an evolutionary process that occurs according to the personality of the teachers, even if themselves do not actually actively decide to make it go one way or the other. So I'm more like in the line of trying to keep it as close as possible to the way it's been taught to me, because I know full well that unintentionally I'm going to change it. So it will change. In other words, it will change, whether we want it or not. So do Koryu and so on. Even if they advertise themselves as unchanging and so on, they are not. So I'm not feeling that I should really add my own, momentum to that. It will change, and if it's practice, it fits the time. The question that we are asking is more like, the population of Aikidoka is declining. But what is an actually adequate proportion of Aikidoka within a country? Do we have too much now? Do you ask yourself the question? Because if you weed out all the people who are there for the wrong reasons, I mean, maybe Aikido is not for everybody. And especially, any time that you study something a little bit difficult, a little bit specific, by definition, it is not for everybody. So, I don't have a problem with the Aikido population is going down. Aikido is in me. It's not going to die because people quit Aikido. It's in me. I'm practicing it, and it's living in many other people. So I don't think it's a big problem.
What about, for example, Josh Gold's project, Aikido Journal, with the Budo Accelerator project? I don't know if you read about that.
Yeah.
Basically, they're trying to put Aikido in businesses for young people, maybe in schools as well. I think we talk about that with Josh. So basically, using Aikido to, like Americans like to say, empower people. Not sure that's the right word actually, but at least
as long as you're not saying leadership.
Yeah. Well, at least to give them some structure and to help people.
Well, whatever you do, if you get good people taking care of kids, whatever they do, you're fine. So Aikido is a perfectly fine vector for this. You need the right people. Those people have to know what they're doing, so they must have studied it for a while, so that they have some depth to what they're teaching. And then, whichever way they drive this to fit whatever people are looking for. Again, as long as they don't lie on what they're teaching, if they're consistent. So, I did talk about this with Josh Gold, and he said that he's had some success with young people, helping them, steering them in a way which was constructive through Aikido. And that's exactly what Aikido is about. It's not the only thing that it's about, but that's a very important part of it. So I don't have an issue at all.
You were saying before that the question is also what does Aikido bring specific, or is it that much different in comparison to karate or judo or Koryu, for instance, or even Daito Ryu actually. We could even extend the question to like soccer or whatever sports or art, even maybe. So on that, what's specific in Aikido? What do you specifically teach through Aikido that you wouldn't be able to teach with something else?
There's a good thing with Aikido because it's very complete. Okay, let's take one example. If you dig into what I've said or written a few years ago, I would have told you that weapons were kind of useless in Aikido, that you didn't need weapons to do good Aikido. And I still believe it. But now as a teacher, I have seen how weapons can be used to actually help work on the same things, but in a different ways, to highlight things differently, and so on. And Aikido is very complex and complete. There is the weapons, there is empty-handed work, there is a little bit of grappling, there is a few strikes and things like this. So antiquated, yes, but also very complete. So you've got an awful lot of situations that you have to learn to deal with. Different systems, different distance, different rules of engagement and so on. So it's a great thing, it's very rich. Having practiced other martial arts, I've done judo, I've done karate, I've done a bunch of different things.
You're still doing karate.
I'm still doing karate. I think it's not as wide, at least to the extent of what I've been exposed to. So this is great about Aikido. I used to think, Aikido's weapons are rubbish. It's not real Kenjutsu. Aikido's grappling is rubbish because it's not real Newaza. Blah blah blah. The overall is more than the sum of its parts. It has emergent properties. If you include those things. So now, and especially because of coronavirus, I teach a lot more weapons than I used to. And when I see people react and integrate things differently through the weapons, I've changed my mind on that. Yeah. So I still believe that you can reach the same level in Aikido without the weapons, but pedagogically speaking, you're missing something if you're not doing it. So I've changed my mind on this. My Aikido teachers, I've changed my mind, I was wrong. I think it really undermines my image as an Aikido teacher, right? Because Aikido teachers are not supposed to make mistakes or to change.
No, of course, they are the heirs of Ueshiba.
Exactly.
The Greek god.
Or Takeda.
So, no, Takeda killed people, so you have to erase him from history.
So so you carry very, very exquisite techniques. You have to know what you're doing, okay? But that's worthwhile in itself. But also, through that work, people change. You see them change. I used to think, when I started, people, they have to basically, especially in Japan, they have to go underground, the tatami is a bit dirty and so on, and it's a bit cold in the room and so on. And at the beginning, I was trying to make the situation as comfortable as possible so that people wouldn't be put off by the less than pleasant aspects of Aikido. And then I realized, wait a minute, the whole point is to deal with those and to embrace those.
As Baptiste Taverne, your friend, says, we're doing a Budo or what?
Exactly. There is so much that you can accommodate. Yeah. I don't think it has to be necessarily cold showers and townland until you drop, but there's an element of that. Yeah. That's why the etiquette and the hierarchy and all that stuff is important. I see children nowadays. Contrary to what people believe, Japanese don't sit in seiza. So just getting the Japanese kids to sit in seiza and adults to sit in seiza properly takes some work, and it's good. It's part of the learning. It's a cultural context that you have to go through. Now, without going too far into techniques, but not doing like stupid Sowariwaza technique that will destroy your knees. But the way those are done is more of a modern thing, and when you see those teachers with the broken knees, it's because of the bad way to practice.
Actually, the Reiki was kind of another question I wanted to ask. Just wanted to close on the what's specific to Aikido. So what someone learning Aikido for maybe 3, 5, or 10 years, what is the specifics he will get from his practice?
Aikido, as formulated by Ueshiba. Is that your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Technically, this is Daito Ryu. But this is Daito Ryu, which is done in a way that fits the philosophy of Ueshiba. An open door. Aikido is one of those arts, I can't think fundamentally in many others. In Iaido, you kill. In karate, you break. You don't do it, okay? But it's the intent which counts. In Aikido, you leave a door open compared to Daito Ryu. In Aikido, you throw away from you. You leave a door open. And that's philosophically very, very important. Now, all Budo are really good educational system and all have a lot to bring. Aikido just goes one little tiny step further by explicitly leaving a door open all the time, to the cost of efficacy, to the cost of reopening yourself to a recurring attack. That is the specificity. And it does so in a universalist manner. It ought to be applied everywhere, not only domestically. So that's very specific. So in Aikido, you take a risk. In other words, you're basically betting on the future. You've controlled the situation. You can either destroy the opposition, which you would do in Daito Ryu. No, in Aikido, you bet on the future and you release that attacker. For the attacker to take the decision of whether they will attack again, or run away, or have a conversation with you. You're betting on the future. I don't see many disciplines who do that. And that's why it's important. Because if we have an argument, and assuming that I'm right, there are several ways I can be right and carry that to you. But if I really want to maintain a relationship, not only between you and me, but with whoever happens to be watching, I need to leave you an exit door. I can't completely undermine you and completely destroy all sense of self-esteem and self-worth for the sake of winning the argument, even if I'm right and you're wrong. There are several ways you can go about it. Aikido, I will try to explain to you in which way you're wrong, but I will leave an open door for you to manage to preserve your ego and your sense of self-worth so that we can continue to have a relationship even after that argument. That's, I think, specific to Aikido in the sense that it puts that in concrete practice.
Yeah, it's very interesting because it's actually a very common point in negotiation. Mm-hmm. All professional negotiators would teach that. You have to leave the door open because if you don't, you're not negotiating.
Yeah.
So
I mean, in teaching something that was culturally, I mean, to go way back to what you said between the French teaching and the international teaching, there's that thing in international schools which is called restorative practice. Restorative practice, for me, it was a culture shock. For me, there was the rule, and if you break the rule, there was the punishment. Simple, it works. No. I was told, no, this is not the way to do it. You have to be a restorative practice. So we have to have a restorative conversation to work out why did you do this and how did you feel when you did it and how do you think I felt when you did it and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, what nonsense. I mean, the kid is going to see through that and work out the answers and just go back and play. But with time, I've realized, well, this is exactly that. It's exactly that. If I'm setting a rule and you break the rule and I punish you, I've basically shut down the conversation and I've undermined you and where is the possibility of growth? No. It's too easy to cater for the students who do well and don't break the rules and screw the rest. But what do you do with those who break the rule and how can you turn them around? And again, you go back to the thing that my colleague told me, your students will never care about what you know until they know that you care. And haven't you heard that before from somebody? This is what Ueshiba was saying. So it applies. It applies, that restorative approach. And yes, you take a risk. You take a risk of letting go a person that will attack you again or will want to revenge. But I'd argue that the chance of them wanting to take revenge on you is probably lesser if you let them go with a little bit of their ego intact.
And that's also a classic philosophical discourse.
Yeah. And a kid that you do a restorative talk to, or you have a restorative talk with, maybe they'll play you like a fiddle and they will tell you what you want to hear and you say, oh, I've done such a good job, and then they go back and they think, screw the old man. And that's the risk. Yes, it is the risk. But
so it teaches people to also be able to trust people and take risks in life.
Yes.
And I would love to have the resources I found a few years ago, but I think I remember correctly what the result of the studies was. It was studies that showed that we have more interest as a social group, as humans, but also as individuals, in trusting people than not trusting people.
It's that game. It's that game when you decide to share or to keep the
And several studies showed that the collaboration and trust works better in the long run for everyone.
Of course. We're a social species.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have made it that far without that social structure and that mutual trust. And you see that in a lot of species.
In that sense, Aikido helps realizing.
It puts a framework to put that into context. Now, of course, if you don't think about it, you just do the techniques, and you can actually turn it around very easily if you start to whack people or to punish people or to try to look good and so on. But if you think carefully at what you're doing, at every single time that you do that iriminage, and instead of locking the person down, you're just letting them go and they come back and you change. You're applying that physically. And I believe that this is a very important way to put those contacts into action. So you have to teach it theoretically and applying it physically. I think it's a huge aspect of it.
Excellent transition for my next question, which is studying in a way Japanese history or Budo history or Daito Ryu history, or from another perspective, philosophy or negotiation or, soft sciences in general.
You mean social sciences?
Yeah, social sciences, but history and philosophy, and in order to interact with push people to self-reflect on their Aikido practice. Do you think that's also important, or just practice is enough?
Well, that's the thing. Practice. Christian said that the practice is you practice for the sake of it. The point of practice is practice. But he says that he's selling himself a bit short, because of course what he teaches in his dojo, it goes way beyond that. He's got that whole mental framework and educational system. So of course he's taking it for granted when he says it, but of course he does the background work in his dojo, which is why maybe he's being misunderstood when he says that, oh, you're just practice. No. He's building something from the ground up. But he's right, it's practice for the sake of practice, but you have to think about it. Now it's much more concrete than people think. You don't start to look into the philosophy or looking into motto teaching and so on. It's much more concrete than that. And it has to be. It was meant like this. Ueshiba said it clearly, you don't have to become, to believe in Shinto, or you don't have to do this and that. It's not a religion. What you see is what you get. So you do it, and hopefully if you're put on the right path and you understand why you're doing it, then that makes sense. For me, I must admit though that sort of open door, of course I had it in my mind and so on, but it became a lot clearer when I saw the Daito Ryu technique and I saw how they were done compared to the way Aikido techniques were done, and I could understand, all right, there is a difference here in the finalization of the technique. It was very useful for me to see both. Of course, if I had kept on doing only Aikido, I would have missed it.
Yeah, it showed that there was a deliberate choice of Ueshiba
absolutely.
Changing technique.
And
there must have been a reason for that.
Exactly. So that was, for me, I needed that. I'm not saying that people need it. So some people smarter than me probably don't need it. It's pretty obvious to them. But for me, I needed that, to get that contrast.
So no specific need for studies, I would say, but at least a minimum of self-reflection on what people are doing, what you are doing on the mats.
Yeah. And what is it? What? Again, it's a framework. What is it you're trying to do? Why do you come? Why do you go into martial art to begin with? Why would you learn to do things to hurt other people? Because that's what they boil down to. So, there's a lot behind that unresolved, I think, issues.
For some people, or many of us, some self-reflection on our own motivations and own problems might be necessary in order to feel better in our practice.
If you start Aikido or the martial arts with a need for doing martial arts, you've got some things to sort out. If you start at uni because your friend dragged you in Aikido class and you had no idea what it was and you just happened to find that super cool, okay, I think it's going to be a lot easier for you. But if you're one of those people like myself who started because you were afraid, because you were bullied and so on, then you come with a baggage that needs to be addressed a lot more explicitly, which is, going back to the Rokas thing. Who knows where he started from? And obviously, his needs were not addressed. And that's the responsibility, once again, of the teacher. He's done what he had to do to see it through. So respect, deepest respect, actually.
The thing is, we see more and more teachers starting teaching everywhere. Probably too many teachers for not that many students.
Yeah, Aikido is maybe it's too big, you could argue. I don't know.
But are they really teaching? I mean, my vision is France, and in France we have a fairly good framework for teaching teachers. But even Japan, if you look at Japan, people are not teaching. They're just practicing.
No, it's a social activity. They could go fishing, it would be the same.
There are very, very few teachers who actually think of what they're doing as the framework they are actually teaching to students. Even higher grade teachers.
Yeah. But that's fine. There is perhaps room for that too, as long as again you don't do damage. It's fine. And again, we're free. I mean, the good thing about the way that knowledge is available through the web and so on is people hopefully they won't be fooled as much as perhaps before. I hope.
Well, internet helps a lot, I think.
And at the end of the day, you do what you want, and you're responsible for yourself. So I'm responsible for Aikido when I teach Aikido. I'm responsible for Daito Ryu when I teach Daito Ryu. But at the end of the day, what I do, with my body in this or that dojo, it's my problem. For example, as you said, I do karate. I spar. I do full contact karate. I recently received an invitation from a young Shotokan karateka who did a reaction to my video. It was the first time that somebody did a reaction to my video. So he invited me to a sports hall, and I had no idea what we were going to do and so on. And he says, do you want to spar? I think about it, I'm like, okay, so it's kind of a lose-lose situation, isn't it? If I say no, Aikido, I don't want to spar. And if I say yes, well, either I get my butt kicked and I look silly, okay? Or as it happened, I kind of hold myself up on this, but not such a challenge because he was so much smaller and lighter than me. So you could argue that the big guy is beating up the small guy. It's a lose-lose situation. But I did it, and I think maybe by the time our conversation goes out, that video is out. It's not out yet. I have no idea when it's coming out, but it was fun. So I don't know what the reaction is going to be from the Aikido crowd. So, he sparred, catastrophe, and
well, you're going to have both.
And actually, I was wearing leg guards because I have a stress fracture on my shin bone because of karate. So I was wearing leg guards, so it looks a little bit odd, but I didn't want to actually further damage my leg. And again, I had no idea who I was there. I had never met the guy. So I went in and I brought the mouthpiece. I said, I have no idea where I'm going. And it turned out to be a fantastically good session. We had a good time. We shared techniques and so on. The sparring was fun as well. It was very short, but it was fun. But again, that's my own thing. I'm not absolutely not arguing that Aikido should include sparring or that people should do it. But why not exploring what you like? And if you're having fun, that's the most important.
Well, actually, your responsibility is not what you're doing for your own fun, but just when you're teaching.
Exactly. And at the end, in my teaching, it's a product of what I do. But again, because again, we are saying that we're doing Aikido, I stick with the Aikido curriculum, the framework that we call Aikido. So we still wear the hakama and so on, and we train in a certain way. I stick to that.
Well, as you used to say, I guess you're still on the same line. But when you're teaching Aikido, and when you're teaching Daito Ryu, Daito Ryu, but not a mix of both.
No. And it's interesting in karate, for example, when we do when we spar, I have to think of not behaving as an Aikidoka. So sometimes when I'm not paying attention, sometimes when the teacher lets me, I'm a bit tired and so on. Yeah, sometimes I'll drop the guys every now and then, and the teacher's gonna laugh. But sometimes you gotta tell me, today you don't drop anybody. It's dangerous. They don't know how to take ukemi. Okay. And then, of course, and most of the time, that's what I should do, because otherwise I wouldn't be learning anything. But it's just the fact of working on yourself and changing your habit and putting yourself in a context which is completely different. Which again is going back to the teachers, and especially in Aikido. They never challenge because they put a context that is kind of favorable to them. And again, you don't want necessarily to say to the drunk guy in the bar next door, come to my seminar and attack me. I want to show my students what I can do. That's not the point. But wearing a white belt in a Kyokushin Karate dojo where half of the guys are doing K1, putting a white belt, being like almost 40 years old, and you get the small kids who are like so much better than you, and the other guys, they just kick your butt. That's super healthy. You're nobody. You're back in a beginner. This is Shoshin. This is the beginner's mind, and it's a happy time. It's a happy time. You're happy to be there where you are.
We talked about that the other day, and I thought you were really really right about that. I think Aikido tends to inflate your ego.
Yeah.
Somewhat, even if you're trying not to.
It's very dangerous. Yeah.
And starting new activities doesn't have to be specifically a Budo or another Budo or to be related to Aikido.
TCA started golf. And now that's a few years ago, but I talked to him when he just started.
60 or when he started, yeah.
And the guy is like on top of the food chain in Aikido, and he's supposed to be that grandmaster who knows exactly how to use his body, who never makes a mistake, blah blah blah. But he's gonna put himself in danger, and he's gonna be told by somebody half his age that whatever way he's moving is completely wrong. And he's able to accept it, and he's able to work on it, and to do what is being told within that context of golf. Now that's the most important thing. And I hope that we can do that. And for us in Aikido, we have to be a little bit more careful about this, because that putting yourself into question is not really allowed by our system, and that's missing. This is where you see a lot of ego with the grades, with this and that, and the power struggles. There's not that sort of reset button that is like, bam, wake up.
There is a transition to the question I mentioned before, the Reigi, the etiquette. I have the feeling that the traditional way of teaching, the Reigi, in its role, not only bowing at the beginning of the class, but I mean the relationship between the teacher and the student and the senpai, was about you have to trust your teacher 100% and you have just to shut the hell up on the mat. Mm-hmm. It's just, which is not the way we teach or we are being taught. No, things are changing. And I don't know, from your teacher perspective, what is the role, the purpose of Reigi, and when you change the traditional ways of teaching, is there a risk that it actually creates like holes in Aikido's structure?
I don't know. It's one component. At the end of the day, you have to start asking yourself, when you take components away from something, when does it stop being what it's supposed to be? So yes, you can know a lot about wine without speaking French, without having ever been to Beaune. But if you really like wine, I think you owe it to yourself to learn a bit of French, to go to Burgundy. It's a package, and it's rich and it's deep. How long can you study something? 20 years, 30 years, if it's just that shallow. So I think the whole package is important, because again, as I told you, and I'm biased because I take a cultural approach to practice. So for me, it's essential. The language, the etiquette, and so on. On the other hand, without over-interpreting it. I mean, I started to pedagogic videos for my students, and I'm explaining the bow, I'm explaining how do you tie a belt and so on, and the meaning behind those things. And the more you look into this, and you know yourself, in many different martial arts, Koryu, Gendai, Budo, they all have different ways to put the belt out or in the hakama, the back first, the front first, and they all have justifications. The whole point is, what are you doing, and what is the reason behind what you are doing? It doesn't mean that the others are wrong, but do you know why you're doing something?
And without your own context.
Yeah, and your own choices. If you're ignorant about the different ways to do, you have not made a choice. You have done the way you've been told. You have copied what you saw. If you know many other ways to do, then what you do is the product of a conscious choice that you can explain and that you can teach precisely. Which is, again, is my whole approach about Aikido, Daito Ryu. What I do is a product of a choice. Then you can argue that I may be mistaken technically and so on, whatever that is. But I can tell you at any time why I'm moving that leg here, why I'm moving my hand here, why I'm doing this or that. I can justify it historically, and then when I'm making a decision, I can tell you why this is that I'm doing it this way. I'm moving like this because there's this in my back that doesn't allow me to do the other thing. And in the context, I'm explaining the bow. You know, is it left, right, and bow, or just hands together? Depends who you've got in front of you. And so on. So as long as what you do is a product of a choice and not of a limitation, that's fine. But that requires you to have a deep overall knowledge about what you're doing. So everything is important. Everything is essential.
What about the senpai kohai or the master-student relationship, which is traditionally in Japan? Can make the students quite miserable.
Can make the senpai quite miserable as well, from the teacher.
Yeah, from the teacher. Which is actually designed to crush the ego of the practitioners and compensate for the lack of...
It's easy in Japan. I mean, the structure is what it is. You start at a certain time and you've got your senpai, you've got your sensei, you've got your kohai. That will never change. So that's very easy, that's very simple. That's why I've got a lot of respect for the guys, the instructors at the Aikikai. They're starting in a system at different times, there's a ranking, and you know they all move up at the same time, and they're within that system, and that's it. And they actively, for most of them, do not try to overreach beyond what is their place. Takes a lot of abnegation. It's a lifetime thing for them. Okay,
isn't that system really important to avoid abuse?
Yeah, which is why I think it's in that sense it's very healthy here in Japan, because the structure of what it is. Doshu is at the top, and then you've got the whole organigram, and it's very clear. Now, of course, people like me or others, maybe it's a bit more complicated because we are in Japan. Of course, we're foreigners. Our reach goes beyond our own immediate group of students, even if we are teachers. That kind of makes the boundaries a bit more fuzzy. But but at least it's very, very simple. In other countries, I don't know. The thing is that you've got a representation bias. You see the fringe of the most vocal people. And all the majority who are doing an excellent job, well, you don't hear them that much. So sometimes I'm thinking that we are very critical about Aikido and so on, but because our vision is distorted, which is why I quit social media. I use social media, in other words, I post my stuff, but I don't look at it because I don't want to have that biased view. And when you focus on what happens on the mat, in your dojo, when I go to teach and so on, it's fine. It's mostly fine. It's just like everything is mostly fine. If you look at the distribution curve, of course, when you go in the fringe, you've got the horrendous stuff or the magnificent stuff as well. Depends which side you are. But mostly, plus minus 1 or 2 standard deviation is mostly fine. It's mostly okay.
Yeah, well, I don't know about the level, but about the way people are behaving, I completely agree with you. Most of the, I don't know, you traveled, I traveled a lot. We went to many dojos across many countries, and I don't know you, but for me, 99% of the time it was
Absolutely.
super fine. I mean,
teachers, all the teachers
practice, good people.
that I've interviewed, all of that, I've met some wonderful people. Exactly. So, yeah, maybe we want to start the conversation all over again because we started from the fringe, and yes, it has to be acknowledged that it's mostly great people. And precisely because of this, if you put clearly from the beginning that Aikido is not supposed to be this or that, if people are not there for the wrong reason, they will mostly be happy there.
Well, I like this expression. I don't know what Aikido is, but I know what it is not. From what we've very often read on social medias, but I do the same as you know. I don't read anymore anything related to Aikido actually.
Yeah, it's probably weird for people to understand this, that because we are kind of very exposed on the social media, but we don't consume it. And it's a completely other discussion, but I think they're doing quite some damage, those social media, so that's why I stay away from them.
That could actually be, there could be a connection with Aikido, because when you reach a certain popularity, you have a larger reach. And actually having a larger reach also creates relationships, more complicated relationships between people, between you, other teachers, your senpai, your kohai. And when you're on social medias, you have the people you know that sometimes you have difficulties taking distance with them, and actually avoiding situations in which you are over your cognitive capacity to really understand the whole context. Is probably a good thing. I think.
Yeah, there is a mismatch, exactly, in the sense that of the information presented to you and your ability to handle that information. And that mismatch is source of discomfort and misunderstanding and so on. So, yeah, which is why it has to be very concrete. But really, people, it's winter, it's cold, it's kind of an effort to get out of your house and put your keikogi on and so on. If you do make that effort, it means that you like it. Who does Aikido for other reason than they're liking it? Who goes into such a miserable time for doing anything?
Well, of course, people like it, but sometimes they like it until they realize that they were not in the past they thought they were. So that's kind of the point.
Now the question is, even that mistake, was it completely void of any teaching or any experience or any growth? Did you grow as an individual going through that, even if it happens to be a mistake? It's a good question.
That's exactly what Mark said in the previous interview. Said even a mistake, is it really a mistake? It's actually where you come from. So if you're happy where you know, what you did before were maybe not that consequential mistakes. They were just part of the construction.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, there are two things. You're responsible for your body, in sense of what you're being asked to do, and did you cause damage to yourself, and then responsible for causing damage to others, either physically or morally. As long as you don't cause damage to other people, it's fine. And again, you go back to the responsibility of the teachers. What is the effect of what you're teaching on your students, and are you doing something positive? Now, of course, there is so much compromise you can make on what you're teaching and so on, and granted that this is not for everybody. The idea of Aikido being universal and for everybody, the way Omoto looks at universal, it's great on paper, but Aikido can't be for everybody, and shouldn't be very boring maybe if everybody was doing it. So it's okay.
Yeah, I think you point something very true. That there is a misunderstanding of what universal meant in the Omoto. I don't know, but in the Aikido framework, in case I also think so. And I agree, if we were all practicing Aikido, I mean, we had this discussion the other day. Some people just don't like being touched. Maybe they should do Kendo or you know, or Kyudo maybe. Some people really love physical contact, and Aikido is great for that. And, well, we are lucky we have weapons, we have some form of Taiso, we have lots of things that can fit many different profiles. But well, we will keep this disagreement on the fact that you think you can reach the same level with or without practicing weapons. I think people should practice weapons. But that's another
well, Ueshiba did not need it, but okay.
Well, but Ueshiba was not an Aikidoist.
He was how do you say? He had credentials in mostly taijutsu, in Daito Ryu, and then he became very proficient in weapon. You can probably go the other way around. People who do very good weapon, they can probably pick up the taijutsu very well, very quickly, and that's fine. And at the end of the day, you don't have to be only an aikidoka. Again, Aikido is part of your life. For me, I don't identify myself as an aikidoka.
Budoka, maybe?
Maybe not even. I'm more than that. It's part of me, but that sort of label of one thing is boring. It's more. You have to be more complete than that. I like the idea of the La Renaissance. You know, when you could do mathematics and philosophy and sports. I mean, we're here for a finite amount of time. Our life expectancy, 80, 90 years. You know, you got to make it count. So, you know, I try to do everything I can. And again, I'm not making a hodgepodge of many things in my teaching. I'm teaching specifically different things. I'm not gonna go on a tangent when I teach biology about the concept of Aikido and how it relates to physics and so on. This is absolute nonsense.
And you don't do the opposite.
And I don't do the opposite. I'm not going to teach an evolutionary biology course when I'm teaching Aikido. Exactly.
But it may have impact on your choices and how to teach to women.
Within me, again, you're changing you. And then you deliver whatever you're delivering in your class, but you
don't have to
work
explain
on yourself. No. Yeah. You're delivering the cultural item, the discrete piece of knowledge to someone in the best way that you find the most efficient and the most honest. And this is the fruit of your own growth. But, you know, I'm not molding people to be like me. In fact, my son is attending my Aikido class, but what my wife was surprised about, she kept saying at the beginning, but why don't you take Kenshin in your class? Because he didn't ask. Oh, but you have to take him. He's your son. No, it's not because he's my son that he's got to do Aikido. Now he happens to want to come to my class, but if tomorrow I'm going to say, no, I want to do soccer instead, off you go and do soccer.
So the role, the importance of the teacher in regard to his students, from the teacher perspective, is to have a form of responsibility first. And we've talked a bit about the senpai-kohai relationship before, mainly in the Japanese system, but even outside of Japan, we see this relationship. What is the role of what role the teacher should take in the dynamic he creates in his own dojo? Because there is the relation between his own students, and as of course the relation he has with other teachers, but also between the students. So we talked a lot about this relationship between teacher and student, but not really what the dojo should be in itself.
Well, it's a good point because it's kind of sad actually, but if you look at research, you'll find that for many markers of achievement, and especially in terms of positive outcomes, often peers have a higher degree of influence on positive outcomes than parents, than teachers. So I'm almost undermining my role as a teacher.
It gives sense to the senpai-kohai relationship.
Exactly. So it's been quantified, and indeed, I'm talking education in general, okay? But it's probably more important for students which group they identify it with in terms of their overall performance and the way they engage with whatever material that they have. The peer pressure, the peer interactions, the encouragement, and so on, which is where the senpai-kohai relationship is essential. Parents, teachers are here to provide a framework. Now, interestingly, those studies also show that while the relative effect on positive outcomes of parents and teacher is lower than that of peers, of course, there is a lot of room for negatives. In other words, teachers and parents can have very negative effects. We go back to our discussion that we had at the beginning with some people who are misguided into Aikido. So it's a whole. So as you say, you have to take the dojo into consideration, which again, I go back to what Vilko was saying. It's exactly that. It grounds you. And you become responsible not for yourself, but for students within an environment of a dojo and interaction between people. There's so much more to it than just teaching how to do Ikkyo. And that's essential. And then within that, you have to account with a bunch of notions such as differentiation, which is a tough one to crack in a Budo. Differentiation is basically teaching to reach out to the different ways people engage with the material and internalize the material, which is built in any educational science nowadays, which is perhaps one of the blind spots of traditional martial arts. There is not that differentiation built in. So that could be an area of improvement, assuming that you want everybody to succeed.
Well, I've heard many people doing Koryu saying that the fact that there was a small number of people in the dojo allowed the teacher to personalize the teaching for each student.
Well, it's what they say about Takeda and so on. So yeah, maybe, but the small number, precisely, a small number differentiation can only really work if it's a small number. In Aikido, where we've got those big seminars and if you are economically bound to have some membership to just make a living out of it, then you need bums in the seat or bums on the tatami. It cannot be, it can challenge this a little bit. And then everybody comes with their own capacity. I mean, I'm not going too much into that, but of course, not everybody can understand things the same way and not everybody has the same potential for this and that, whether it is physically or intellectually. So where do you put the expectations? You can't have the same expectation for everybody, because if you do, then you've got the very competent ones who are going to be held back, and then you've got the people who are struggling, who are going to be set unrealistic expectations, which create distress and so on. So there is a lot more to it. So and that's what we talked about before, that we are doing an antiquated system, and that's first, as a defense system, because it hasn't changed on its curriculum, it's no longer very applicable. Well, I think the pedagogy is kind of the same. Where do we keep a traditional teaching methodology while also catering for the progress that we've done in the research on education? So that's a very important question. It's very easy in my day job as a biologist teacher to try this and that, and in fact I'm probably a little bit more conservative compared to my colleagues on teaching methodologies, being a scientist and being French and so on. Now in Aikido, maybe on the other hand, I'm a bit more liberal than other people, who knows. But that's the difficulty, you need to strike the right balance. And again, it's easy to say that I'm going to teach 5 people the best I can, and the others, the hell with them. That's not what I want. But I don't want either to make sure that, I need 60 people to make an income, to make a living, which is why I will not be a professional Aikido teacher. I've got my day job, and what I do is on top. In fact, the dojo is costing me money. You know yourself, I've bought you a big stack of weapons so that the students could have weapons.
Well, it's not a very viable business model nowadays, especially not in Japan.
And and I think I'm not judging people who are professional, but I don't want to be, because it forces me to make some compromises.
Sometimes I wonder if there are now less professionals in Japan than in France, for example.
Of course. There is.
No, Japan. The model in Japan is really not designed.
No. Everybody's their job. So you have to take those things in consideration while sticking with the traditional aspect. But again, even the word traditional is I try not to use it because what is traditional? Aikido is not traditional. Ueshiba was absolutely not a traditionalist. We do traditional Aikido. What do you mean? The guy took Daito Ryu and he pissed off like the 99% of the Daito Ryu crowd by doing something different with what he had learned. So do you call that traditional? No, not at all. And Takeda, if you study Takeda, it's the same. His history and even his name is also obscure. Don't know traditionism. Yeah. But having a body of knowledge and some principles and some concepts and passing them on and explaining where they come from and why they were passed on. I mean, even like if you go to on those grounds, the old Daito Ryu teachers will tell you they are teaching techniques for males and techniques for females. Now you say that nowadays, of course, it's a ridiculous distinction, because of course you could have a small male, a big male, a small female, a big female, and blah blah blah. Of course, this is a ridiculous distinction, but at the time, within that context, that did the job. Now, of course, nowadays it's not very useful to reason in those terms, but just to say that this happened, okay, noted. They did that, of course.
And technically speaking, it's just about changing the words. Small people and
my point is that
the techniques are still there.
My point is that it's not because I'm saying that it happened that I'm actually agreeing with it. You can talk about slavery, you can talk about segregation, you can talk about this issue. It's not because you're studying them that you agree with them. There's a lot in martial arts that I don't want to put in practice, but it's interesting to know this.
And that's a good example for evolution of the art, because you keep the techniques, but you change the way you're first naming them and teaching them, by the way.
And
the techniques are still the same.
Yeah, and what was revolutionary with Ueshiba in his time is not revolutionary at all anymore, but of course,
Well, and technically it wasn't that much revolutionary either, since it was mostly Daito Ryu.
Yeah.
So nothing new
No. And
technically speaking. I had this feeling listening to your argument about the importance of reflecting how to teach. And I was like, yeah, but you just said an hour ago that you had a pretty fair timetable. You have time for that.
I have time for that, yeah.
So you can allow yourself not to be a professional. But what about the fact that someone who was working 40 or 50 hours a week will have less time to focus on, and your teacher, I mean, everything is about teaching in your life. So someone who is doing something that has nothing to do with teaching, with also teaching Aikido after work, how does he find the time to really work on his teaching if he's not a professional?
Well, that's what the French system is doing, isn't it? They have a whole system in place with programs and curriculum and a progression, and they even test their grades all together nationally. That's precisely what they're doing. It has advantages, it has probably inconvenience as well, but that's precisely that. They say that we're going to take that. We think that teaching methodology is important, and for people who take responsibility over a dojo, they're out to be going through this and that and that. So it takes time to those people. I mean, they attend seminars and they get some certificates and so on.
There could be also like a teaching course, not only within the French system, but in general. I think teacher or own teachers at the Budo, they could say, "Oh, you should open your dojo," but they're not going to teach you how to teach. So basically, it's tough. But some of the groups, like Birankai, they have a system specific for teachers, and
in Japan as well. I mean, you can go to the Shido courses organized by the Japanese Aikido Federation. Those exist.
So, how important is it for you to have a system? Do you think people should be independent and do their own stuff and think about their own way of teaching, or what about having a system and making it in some cases mandatory to teach?
Deep down, well, first, I'm not in one, so it would be pretty intellectually dishonest for me to say that you have to have one. No, I think there has to be a reflective approach to teaching, and good teaching must be based on good teaching. That's the idea, and it's a deep personal thing. Again, changing yourself. We're getting back always to the same point. From the moment that you take responsibility of a group of people, you have to be pretty sure of what you're doing. You're gonna make mistakes along the way, of course, and I make mistakes every day in my day job as well. The way I deal with this or that student, or the way I present this material or that material. And it can't be perfect, but you and that's what makes you grow as a teacher. So no, I don't think there has to be a system, but ideally you would have a bunch of competent people to whom you could ask for advice. And again, most people who go in strange directions are usually people who don't have a very good guidance.
So teaching is the alpha, I don't know if we say that in English, but we would do in French, alpha and omega of everything. So it's
nowadays, I mean, again, I don't want to overextend it, but education, when I see the students now and what they have to worry about compared to what I worried about when I was their age, I had no political sense when I was 17, 18. I didn't know anything about the world, and now the world is all in their hand and they see absolutely everything without a filter. Or if filter there is that positive reinforcement thing that goes on based on your feed and what the thing that you ought to be seeing or not seeing, and they have no clue what's going on. And I feel absolutely not for a second do I think that the youth are stupid these days, nothing, they're snowflakes. If I was in their situation when I was 17, 18, with the crap that we've left environmentally, politically, the complexity of having to deal with all those issues that we never considered when we were their age, had been, the snowflake in the best of circumstances. So really, we have to support them, and a lot of us actually don't even understand those social media and the misrepresentation of information and the alternative facts and all that sense. So how do we stir our students? Which is why having a very concrete practice, such as, again, Aikido, with a rather pretty simple message, and a concrete way to put it into practice, open door, relationship, conversation, taking a risk, concrete, simple, I think that's already good enough.
And something that is actually I wouldn't say a lifetime path, but at least a path that takes years to build. It's not something immediate.
Exactly. So that's
has depth.
Yeah, if we can actually finish on that, that's exactly it. So yes, I've said at the beginning, Aikido is a rubbish system for learning self-defense quickly. Go and get yourself a Krav Maga class or whatever that is, and you'll be much better, much quicker. But this notion of having a lifetime of study, providing that it's deep enough for you to keep digging, because of course if it's shallow, then you can be disappointed. But there is a lot to be learned. Then you've got a lifetime of study. And for younger generations, it's quite important, and that to delay gratification. Again, it has to do with manipulation and so on. What I don't do it. Immediate gratification. You've answered that question right there. Here is your star. You answer 10 questions right, or here is your ribbon. No. There has to be a point when there is no immediate gratification, because at the end of the day, sorry, but sadly, the ability of young people to delay gratification is a very, very good predictor of success in the sense of academic success, GPA, number of years of university. So of course it's a very biased way to assess success, but hey, in our society, it's pretty important to do that. And those are predictors of success. That and IQ, and I'm sorry that IQ is not very popular, but it's sadly it's as predictor of those sort of outcomes. It's pretty good as well. So in terms of the delaying of gratification, I mean Budo. I mean there's nothing to win in Aikido. You may not actually even take tests and so on. You may wait your white belt until you're Shodan. I think that's a good framework for this. Now, I don't want to go into the Stanford experiment with the marshmallow and whether you eat the marshmallow straight away or you wait for the marshmallow and so on. But there is some of that. Though at the end of the day, I mean, you can put a link to the study if you want. One very important outcome of that study and the follow-up study that were done, the main conclusion of the first study was that the kids who were able to delay gratification, i.e. know that they should not eat the marshmallow right now because they know that if they don't, they will get a second marshmallow, versus the kid who ate it straight away, that were seemingly unable to bet on the future. Those who were able to delay gratification did better, GPA, university, and so on. Because at the end of the day, you do your homework instead of playing soccer with your friends because you identify that the long-term goal is more important. Except that they didn't really take into consideration in the first study the environmental aspect. And when they increased the sample size and they controlled for social background and so on, you could see, and this is why having a stable environment like Aikido is essential, because for a kid to be able to project themselves in the future, they need to be in an environment where the future exists and it can be relied on. In other words, kids who are in families where you're told that at Christmas you're gonna get that fire truck, and when Christmas comes, the truck is under the tree. It's gonna be a lot easier for you to project yourself. Whereas if you're in a family where there is maybe more uncertainty in terms of the income and the fire truck is not here, how are you going to project yourself in future and bet on the future and delay gratification? Because those kids will get what they get when they get it, because they know that maybe at Christmas there's not going to be the fire truck. Aikido, just like parenting, I've said at the beginning or at some point that parents had relatively speaking less positive outcome than peers. One thing that parents have absolutely to do is to provide a stable environment for the kid to project themselves. The dojo in Aikido is also for that, and especially in places where at home it can be a little bit volatile. I mean, talk about right now the number of people who lose their jobs and so on. If the dojo can be a stable place where there's a curriculum and there is a set of rules that could contribute to providing that stable framework. And frankly, for me, that's a lot more important rather than knowing whether I'm going to be able to handle 4 people attacking me because they are drug addicts and I need to get their fix. And I'm going to end up in the river somewhere.
Well, we don't
prioritize.
We don't live in the Bronx, but if we were, we wouldn't be doing Aikido. So
no, exactly.
That's kind of
exactly.
the point.
So at the end of the day, if we're going to wrap it up like this, yes, Aikido has a lot to bring. And I would say especially, as I see sadly the situation evolving, I'm seeing that there's probably going to be more of a need for that stability and that safe haven of application of some situation without the noise and the uncertainty associated with all of the other aspects of life. So take the dojo as an antiquated place where you learn antiquated techniques and you learn them a certain way, but at least there is a bubble of something precious that can be done for a long time by everybody.
Are you comfortable with this as a conclusion, or because I think it's a really good conclusion, or is there anything else you'd like to?
No, I think yeah. I mean, I think it does. I hope it does answer the question of what does Aikido have to bring, as explicitly as I can actually put it. So maybe it's a good way to stop it.
I'd be happy to have the same talk maybe in 10 years, where I will ask, what did teaching brought to your own Aikido? Because that would be also a very interesting question to answer, I believe.
Yeah. And then who knows what the world's going to be like in 10 years.
Yeah, crazy world, right? Thank you very much for coming today. Like renting a car, not taking the
train.
Yeah, not taking a train, COVID situation, everything. We're not wearing masks. It's just the two of us talking. But Japan is not as bad as many other countries.
No,
but still, we're doing our part. We're cautious. Thank you very much. The next interview is. Honestly, I don't know when. It's the end of the year. We're going to have Christmas in 10 days, I think, from now. So it's really the end of the year. And this will be published in January. I hope we will have some people versed in business for the next interviews. So we will switch maybe a little from education to business. New insight, actually. In this series. Thank you very much for watching. Almost 2 hours again. See you soon for the next one. And not a Merry Christmas because it's going to be published in January, but it's mid-December, so Merry Christmas anyway. Thank you very much. Goodbye.